Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Stella Herself podcast. New episodes every Thursday. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and follow on IG, Spotify, Apple Music. Leave a review on Apple Music or at least rate if you liked the podcast. Don't forget to share a screenshot or an aesthetic pic or boomerang of you listening or watching on your IG story and tag me so I can repost. This week is a little different. It's been such a long time since I've had a guest, so I'm super excited to announce that I have Tanya Cole-Lesnick on, who is a psychotherapist and coach. So today we're going to be talking about mental health, setting boundaries, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable, and so much more. So I hope you guys enjoy. Let me know what you think, if you want me to have more guests on, and if there's anybody else who comes to mind that you want to see me chat with. So without further ado, let's get started. Hi Tanya, how are you?
Hi Stella, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being on my podcast today. I'm so excited to get, a professional's opinion and insights on topics that I feel like I'm super interested, my viewers are super interested, and it's just such an honor to have you, so thank you for being here.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited. I'm excited for our conversation and to see what comes out of it.
Yeah, same. So tell us a little about yourself. Where are you from? I'm really interested to know when you first got interested or into the mental health field.
So I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C., but for the past over 30 years, I've been living in New York. Now I'm outside of New York City, about an hour north of the city.
Awesome.
I first got interested in mental health. Really, I grew up in a family where my mother experienced a lot of anxiety as rage. And so as a child growing up in that home, I kind of learned how to navigate that, trying not to set my mother off and all that. And not to say that that was the only thing that helped me develop as a person, but it had a very powerful impact. And so, but going towards therapy or mental health myself was not something I really thought of for many, many years later. I was struggling when I was in my 20s to have a long-term love relationship, and I wasn't sure what was in the way and wasn't sure how to go about helping myself through that and to a different outcome. And at that time I started to consider the possibility of going into therapy as a client myself. I was a graphic designer at the time, and this was more than 30 years ago, and I met with a therapist who was wonderful, and I felt immediately sort of in a space where I knew I was going to be cared for and understood. And she suggested I add group therapy to the mix, and she ran both. And then she suggested I go into her group therapy as well, which really terrified me. The thought of being this vulnerable that I was with her, with people I didn't know, felt kind of, the thought of it was sort of impossible. But I trusted her. And I was kind of intrigued also. That process, really the combination of being in a group with other people working through their emotional stuff and working through my own at the same time, and being able to process separately with her when I wasn't feeling ready yet to share some of those things that came up for me in the group, helped me learn about myself, having needs, what they were. I went into that experience feeling very flawed, and it helped me see that I wasn't flawed, that being human is complicated and there's a lot of layers to that, and seeing these amazing people that were in group with me struggling in some similar ways helped me let go of some of those worries that I was flawed. And as I grew and got more confident, I did meet my husband very close to that time. He and I have been married more than 30 years now. We have 2 grown daughters, and that was amazing, and sort of my life taking that turn was amazing. But what I didn't anticipate was connecting to myself, very deep, very real way that changed everything for me. At that time, I decided to go back to school and become a therapist, and that's what I did because it was so life-changing and wanting to dedicate my life to helping other people through a similar experience.
Right. That's so cool. And I know you mostly specialize in group therapy, correct?
Group therapy is where I'm kind of creating a next chapter.
Okay.
And wanting to lead more with groups. I've always done groups, but they've always been in addition to the individual work that I've done, working towards flipping that and doing more groups with individuals supplementing the group work, because I think so much happens in group that can't happen individually. You can touch on unconscious things, and
right.
Just seeing other people go through some similar kind of work is really powerful and motivating. So
yeah, I was just going to ask, what do you think the biggest difference is between individual and group?
I would see group as kind of a microcosm for your world outside of groups. So if there's something that, let's say you're somebody who struggles to set boundaries, you can start either doing it in group if there's a boundary that is coming up that you feel like you need to set, like, I don't feel ready to talk about this yet.
Right.
An example of a boundary that somebody could set. Or if somebody has a tendency to be a little dependent on people and people are jumping in to help that person can say, I really need to work this through myself, so I just need a little space as I talk about it. Something like that. It's lots of different layers.
Right. On the topic of setting boundaries, that's definitely something I wanted to discuss with you today. I talk about it a lot on my platforms just because it's been so prevalent in my life, growing up, becoming an adult over the past few years, and you just kind of realize you have to be the one to kind of show others how you want to be treated. And I feel like, especially being a woman in our society, we're just very socialized to not set boundaries. And looking over your page for the first time, one of the main things that really stood out to me was your post on being nice versus being kind. What do you think the main difference between those two adjectives are?
I think being nice, it's not about checking within. Being nice is really a certain kind of agreeable behavior. And it's a slippery slope, being nice towards people-pleasing tendencies, where you're focusing on what you think the other person might want from you and leading with that, giving them that, or letting that be the priority or the lens that you're making those decisions through. How am I going to behave? What does this other person want from me? Versus being kind, which is honoring yourself and then communicating whatever you need to communicate to the other person while keeping yourself in mind. So being kind could be honestly letting somebody know you don't have the bandwidth right then to really connect to them. Let's say somebody's calling you and they're upset about something and you just worked and then you're exhausted and you want to be there for your friend but you can't do it. That's the kind of thing that's kind, to say, I honestly can't be here for you in this way right now, and figuring out another time, as opposed to being nice, which might be staying on the phone, talking something through, being very disconnected, not present, feeling depleted, and not really there for the other person. So,
it's like one of those things I didn't even know until I knew, and just how, especially becoming aware of it, just how many instances there are even per day where you're kind of given a choice. Like, am I going to set a boundary? Am I going to stay up for myself, put myself first, or am I just going to kind of go along with something to keep the peace or make the other person happy? And so when we are practicing setting boundaries and maybe trying to break out of this mold of the good girl, how would you recommend kind of get comfortable almost being uncomfortable, or when you're faced with a decision and you just know if you say something it's going to make it awkward, it's going to make it uncomfortable? How do we be okay with creating that potential tension?
I think first of all you have to have some belief that it's going to be worth it. Belief in, the more I do this, the more I can honor myself, the better I get at doing it. If you don't believe it's going to bring you somewhere helpful, a place of growth that you're longing for, what's the point of going towards that discomfort? But if you do believe that, okay, I am going to get something really important if I start to take better care of myself, which I believe, I think starting to recognize where it's coming up. Like what you said earlier, right? It can come up multiple times in a day and you don't even realize it.
Yeah.
and to know it's hard. This is hard. It's uncomfortable, especially if you're not used to setting boundaries or speaking up for yourself in that way.
Yeah.
So to honor that this is a difficult process and to choose it anyway, I really suggest for people to track it first. Like, where is it coming up? Where's the thing that you feel most impatient about? What's the thing that you feel like, oh my gosh, if I say yes to that thing one more time,
right,
you know, I don't know what I'm going to do, that kind of thing. What's kind of rising to the top as needing the most attention, if anything? And honestly, if not, I would say even flipping a coin is fine, but choose something that you can start strengthening that muscle with. Depending on how challenging it feels, if it feels really, really hard, then maybe calling a friend or a coach or somebody to say, okay, I'm going to do this thing. So I'm just telling you what I'm doing. I'm going to go do it, and I'll call you back when I've done it. Just to get some support, some celebration. You've said it, so you'll follow through with it.
Right.
I think mostly to honor that it's really hard, and let yourself do a small chunk and celebrate that, and trust that as you keep going, that voice will get stronger.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Recently, I've been talking about, you know, if they get your coffee order wrong, going back and saying, you know, politely, obviously, but that can just be such an anxiety-inducing thing, because it's like, oh, it's not a big deal, really. Like, I'll just drink the coffee anyway. But, you know, I've done it a few times this year where I've made the conscious decision, like, no, I'm going to go back. I'm going to ask them to make it right.
I had a situation very recently, just this week, yesterday. I had accidentally not blocked off my day because it was a holiday. Somebody had scheduled with me for a free discovery session that I do, and when I realized it at first, I decided, oh, I'll just do the session, it's fine, you know, I'll have the rest of the day off, but I will just do that session. And then I realized I ended up having plans, and I was trying to make it work, and then I said, what am I doing? So even though, like, I am very aware of this pattern and I'm watching for it, it still sometimes is my knee-jerk to go towards sort of being nice, people-pleasing, not wanting to necessarily do what feels difficult sometimes. I mean, in the end, I rescheduled with this person. It was fine. We found a perfect other time.
When you're not used to it, it can feel like you're being rude or mean, and it's nice to have that positive experience or almost like reinforcement of it not being a big deal. And it's like, oh.
I mean, and the truth is, it could be a big deal.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
In the situations you and I talked about, it was fine. But sometimes we do come across as rude, but that doesn't mean don't do it. It means it's still, I think, best to honor ourselves at the core so that we are genuinely showing up. We're being authentic. And we're taking care of ourselves.
How would you recommend dealing with, you know, the aftermath of setting a boundary or telling somebody no if they do have a negative reaction, like especially a close friend or someone, you know, just more personal than a barista? How do we deal with those feelings after of like, oh, they're disappointed in me or they're angry with me?
Number one, try to pay attention to what part's yours. Sometimes we go down this narrative of like, oh my God, I was so rude, they didn't like it, they're upset with me, they're mad at me. Where it could be that it was an uncomfortable moment, because absolutely it can be uncomfortable, but that person, as that person's processing, gets it, understands it, respects it, possibly. I mean,
right.
No, but I'm just saying, watch your own narrative. Sometimes we get into our own explanations of what's happening. Already, if you're feeling like, oh, this is a hard thing to do, and I don't want to tell this person this thing, but I'm gonna do it, it's already kind of a loaded issue, right? We've got a lot of emotions already connected to it. So it's very easy to go down this kind of rabbit hole of, oh my God, they're never gonna talk to me again. Now, on the other hand, it very well could be that. It could be you set a boundary and somebody really is pissed and really has decided they don't want to be friends with us. I mean, if it gets to that point, I think sometimes we make a decision about whether or not it serves us to have somebody in our lives that is not open to honoring our own need to take care of ourselves.
Exactly.
And sometimes it's a work in progress, like maybe we're saying the first boundary we've ever set with somebody. People can be confused if you've never set boundaries before and all of a sudden you start working on that.
Yeah.
It can feel sometimes like it's coming out of left field, so it can be helpful to give people context to say, I've really been working on setting boundaries for myself, excuse me, or figuring out what I really want and honoring that, or whatever way you can start to talk about that. And let's say you do that, the person is upset, you can check in with them and talk it through with them and get to a deeper level of looking at what happened, you know, what's coming up for that person, and why did you, if you're the one that's setting the boundary, why did it come to that for you, and just getting deeper with that person. So kind of a depends answer, but there's lots of layers there.
Yeah, it can definitely go so many different ways. What's helped me is kind of that we were just saying at the end, like having a little bit of hope, like, you know, this could bring us closer together as friends, you know, if they are willing to listen or to share how they're feeling. How do we not judge ourselves for that knee-jerk reaction of automatically people-pleasing or saying yes to something, agreeing to something we maybe later realize, like, oh, I did it again, or oh, I said yes when I didn't really want to.
This kind of change is hard. So not only is it hard to do it the first time, but it's, and like I just shared with you, I still have it come up. It's the kind of thing that takes repetition to learn it and build that muscle. It takes recognizing when it's showing up. There are a lot of gray areas in there. I was just talking with some friends last night about it, and some of these friends, we were talking about people pleasing and whether or not they identified themselves as people pleasers. And one of the things that came up is really the wish to be able to honor that part of themselves that is generous, to connect to people from this very giving place. And I think to let yourself be in the gray area of it. It's not all good, it's not all bad. It's when you're putting yourself on the back burner and putting others ahead of you where it becomes the issue. Just starting to recognize that, I think, is huge progress to celebrate, and let yourselves take some time in really being able to identify and getting clear about some of these places. You don't have to get clear about every place it's happening all at once. Kind of change is overwhelming if you think, oh, I'm never going to do it again. Being hyper vigilant about setting these firm boundaries, but I think there's something wonderful about starting to catch it, even if you're catching it too late. You've already done it, but starting to recognize it, because the more that happens and you're starting to recognize it, the more you are going to be able to make some lasting change.
There's kind of this meme or just, you know, relatable thing online of, you know, like I've seen TikToks of so many girls doing it, but like, oh, like once you decide to go on your healing journey or cut off toxic relationships or friendships that are no longer serving you, or stop going out, whatever it is, your life can sometimes kind of feel boring or lonely. What do we do when we feel, I think, boredom especially?
I mean, it also sounds like there's some gray area in there. People are not all good or all bad, or people are not pushing against your boundaries or not. I think a valid choice could be that you have different levels of friendships, closer, and you're more authentic with those people, and some are just for a little adventure and fun and you don't get as deep with them. If it is toxic and you're worried about kind of getting rid of toxic friends and then being in the void of not having the kind of connections you want, I mean, I think building new community now that, I mean, what you're describing for yourself or other people that are going through this is recognition that, oh wait, I want to connect differently to people. I want to focus on different things. Take some time. So you don't have to get rid of every friend that feels like they're not the healthiest friends for you, and then build new community. You can start building new communities, spending more time. But I get it. Like if somebody's toxic and they keep bringing you down, some of these friends would be, it would benefit you more to get make some of these changes sooner rather than later if it really is impacting your mental health in a negative way.
Right.
So while I'm saying allow for some of this gray area, I think be mindful though of when it's really toxic and unhealthy.
Yeah. You know, I know we always hear about the fight or flight response, but what about freezing? Especially when, you know, maybe you wanted to speak up for yourself, or you're going to meet up with this person to, you know, express a concern or something, but then you just freeze.
I mean, I think first be kind to yourself, again, and not to keep reiterating this point, but I think it's such an important one. This is hard to do. Like, be kind to yourself. And if you're gonna freeze, you probably don't know it until you're actually frozen. And so if you freeze, then you prepare better for the next time, knowing you need a little extra help to kind of push yourself. So it could be write it all out, even use what you've written. Sometimes people do read what they've written to somebody, or sometimes just writing it out helps them be a little bit more prepared. I think sometimes doing just a piece of it, you don't have to like say everything all at once in one big sort of face-to-face. It could be that you start with one little piece, maybe, but it depends on what it is. I think even starting not to say it right away, but to like lead up to it. So to say to the person, there's something that I want to talk with you about, but it's so hard for me and I'm worried I'm gonna freeze. And then once that's out, it can be easier just to keep going to the next step. I think it's disarming for the other person as they hear you sort of struggling. I mean, it might be the kind of thing that triggers some anxiety in them, but
yeah, it sounds like ultimately it just comes down to kindness and honesty, which is low-key the theme of everything.
And I know I keep coming back to this as well, is like these different layers and shades of gray, and like let yourself move through these things. It doesn't have to be one and done. It doesn't have to be this big amazing like clearing it all out at once and sort of being left feeling you're alone in this void.
Yeah, and I feel like social media doesn't always help with that. Everyone posting their best moments, like there's not a lot of those layers or gray area of like, oh yeah, I had to like struggle to get to this point, or I don't know, yeah, I'm posting a picture at this party, but really not a lot of these are real connections or really close friendships or whatever it may be. Do you have any advice for kind of cultivating a more positive social media experience, or even just how to detach and ground ourselves from social media, or even just the news and global events and things going on?
All of the above can be so stressful and triggering for people. I have a lot of my clients that take some time away from social media, or they take it off their phone, but they keep it on their computer, but it's a little bit more complicated to get into it from their computer, so they just don't do it as much. Some people have rules with themselves, like no phone after a certain time, before a certain time, that kind of thing. Or I'm only going to look for this limited period of time for the day. So I think there's that. And you use the word cultivate. I love that word. And I think, absolutely, I think sometimes to cultivate sort of your feed very deliberately so that they're only uplifting things in there. I mean, I think that getting into that comparison mode when glitter reel is what they're putting out there, it can be triggering for so many of us. And you don't have to make these changes forevermore. It could be, I'm going to take a whole day and I won't even look at my phone until a certain time. See how that feels. See what comes up. Or I'm going to only allow things in my feed that are uplifting. And to be very picky about what you allow into your feed and see how that feels. Yeah. We're talking about social media stuff, but you also mentioned the news.
Exactly.
And the world. And I mean, people are really, when they're immersing themselves in these things, which people can get caught up in. It can be hard sometimes for people to pull themselves away, but often what the report is like, I'm so stressed out, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm really struggling. So to make a decision about some kind of tweak that you want to do, and then try that one out, see how it goes, and allow a period of trial and error of shifting this, but knowing that it's triggering you and it's stressful and that a change is going to be really important to figure out for yourself.
Yeah, I like what you said about trial and error, because again, it's not like it has to be this all or nothing thing, like after this day I'm never gonna look at Instagram again, or I mean, that might work for some people, but it's like it doesn't have to. Something else I really like about your page is how you talk about joy and just, I guess, creating more joy in just your day-to-day life. A lot of the times it can just feel like we're trying to get through, just trying to get through the work week, just trying to get through, I remember especially in high school, especially back then, just trying to get through the day. I've been hearing it so much lately because we're kind of wrapping up the year. The days are long, but the years are short. So how would you recommend, I guess, creating more joy? Because it really is our days that make up our lives.
I was just, as you were talking about that quote, I was just remembering, and I'm not going to be able to access it quickly, but Brené Brown has a special on Netflix, and one of the things that she said in there is like how we're actually terrified to feel joy, because if we feel joy, the fear is that we're going to get sucker punched by pain and loss and sorrow, or I'm butchering it now. I think it's something that requires very deliberate attention. I imagine, I know for clients, when I ask lots of clients about what does bring them joy, more often than not, the answer is I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to think.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. And even myself, at various points, I'm more connected to what brings me joy than others, because life, moves, and what might be joyful for us sometimes isn't always. But starting to connect to that, what does bring me joy? What does that look like? Spending time every day reminding yourself of what brought you joy as a kid could be a good place to start. Having moments where maybe you're not quite at joy, but you're at least leaving negative and going into neutral. That can be sort of a start, a nod towards, okay, I feel a little bit better in this moment, and taking note of that. Dedicate some time towards, again, a trial and error part, checking within, what feels good, what's fun for me, and then very deliberately putting those things into your day-to-day life. When I was younger, I was really good in sports, and it was a very natural thing for me. And then as I got older, I started to have a very love-hate relationship with it, with body image stuff, stuff, all of that. And I feel like I'm just coming back to movement from a more joyful place after going through a lot of just different ups and downs. And so I've joined a hiking group with other people, which has been really fun, because then we hike together and we have community and we talk, and there's joy in that. And I'm just exploring indoor rock climbing, which is
oh my gosh,
wacky, but it's fun for me in a way that, just lifting weights or whatever is not offering that same kind of experience, that joyful experience. That is just an example of me allowing myself to connect to, well, what would be more fun for me, so that I can honor my wish to move and, be stronger and have health that way, but also to have some fun with that.
And I think what's helped me is just allowing myself to feel silly, or even just stupid sometimes. Like, my friends and I were doing tennis earlier this year, and none of us ever played tennis. It was just purely for fun, but I just was reminded of, this is just how it feels to enjoy something without judgment or pressure to be good at it or excel at it, and I can just enjoy myself. In the same kind of topic of, what do we do when life, or just, with the news, work, school, maybe even, when it gets to be too much, how do we make sure that we are recharging from all of that and not just numbing ourselves?
That's a really good question. I think numbing, it's often connected to volume as well. So let's say that watching TV allows you just to kind of feel, just have a little bit of mindless nothing and kind of let that be in your environment, and you feel calmer from it, and then you go on to other parts of your day, then that can be a really helpful tool. But if you feel like you're getting sucked in and you're watching TV for hours and you're struggling to pull yourself away, then that's more of the numbing experience. I think it's to be very mindful and aware of what you're choosing, and why I think connecting to your body is so important, and sometimes just breath, following your breath. I personally don't do any fancy breathing exercises. I just kind of breathe and bring myself back to my body, and that helps me get a sense of peace. I think just paying attention to what's distracting you and taking you away versus letting you be in a peaceful space, because they can look similar sometimes, but to get honest with yourself, like, am I taking myself away from the rest of my life and not really wanting to focus on it and avoiding things? And that's more likely distraction and numbing out, that kind of thing, versus I'm going to keep coming back to myself. I'm going to keep connecting to my breath. I'm going to keep sort of making sure to get into a quiet space and then continue on with things that are meaningful to me.
Yeah. Would you say how you feel afterwards also would be a good indicator?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think sometimes if you're doing some of these numbing out things, it can get depressing. If you're spending a lot of time, whatever it might be, I mean, certainly substances or TV, as I mentioned, or, I don't know, over shopping, that kind of thing, where it's like you're kind of doing a fix, and also there's some insatiability to it too. I think
yes,
you're doing it, but it's not really helping you feel better. You just need to keep doing it to keep filling that void. It's not bringing you anywhere new or good. So yeah, I think all of those things can be helpful to help you identify, oh, I think this is me avoiding or me numbing out, as opposed to me catching my breath is often how I refer to it in a healthier space. I think it's a process of, okay, I've had a full day or I've had a full morning. I'm just going to spend a little time catching my breath and then see where I'm at before choosing what's next.
I like that. What are more ways you personally recommend for just grounding ourselves and getting back in our bodies?
Breathing, yes. I mean, I think the movement pieces, having movement in my day helps me generally feel more grounded across the board. Journaling is something that I'm not, some people are really amazing at like having a regular journaling practice. I'm a little bit in and out with it.
Same.
Sometimes I don't. But I do find that it helps if I'm having a lot of thoughts swirling around in my head and I'm struggling to feel clear about what I want to say or do related to some of those thoughts, then just writing it out is a helpful process for me. It helps me let go and then move forward with that. For me, even figuring out how I want to use my time is an important grounding process for me, because I can get revved up about thinking, oh my God, I've got so many different pieces that I'm wanting to spend my time focused on, and I'm not sure what my priorities are. Like taking some time out to really make those decisions so I can let go of it too in my head, and I don't keep thinking, oh, I've got to figure this out. Well, I have figured it out and I'm going to go with it. That helps me sort of release a lot of, I think, angst.
Yeah, sometimes just knowing where to start can be so helpful. I love making a list. Once I realized I could just journal by making a list, I was like, oh, well, I can do that.
Right. But I love what you're saying, because I think that's the thing. What you're describing is sort of like what ends up being the deterrent, right? Like, I don't really know how to journal, so I'm not going to do it. And
Right.
I'm realizing, oh, you get to choose. Like,
Yeah.
you can do it any way you want. So to start to, again, that word cultivate, which I love, cultivate, what are the things that helps you just catch your breath and feel like you're less sort of swirled up with some of these angsty feelings, and that you feel like, okay, sort of I know what I'm doing. And even what you're saying about the list, because I have a tendency to be a little bit too focused on the list.
Really?
But also I need to have the structure to feel grounded.
Yeah.
So I'm always working to find that middle ground. I don't want to be overly attached to what I think I should be doing, but I also like to have that clarity. So I'm always doing a bit of a dance of getting clear about it, and then making a point to be done with the day if I feel like, all right, you know, there's a few more things on my list, I didn't do them, oh well, and letting myself get better at letting go.
Yeah.
And I think bottom line is knowing ourselves.
Yes.
The more we know about ourselves and what we need and how to honor what's true for us, what gets overwhelming for us, what's too much for us, what our hopes and dreams are, what's fun for us, the more we can start incorporating those things into our day-to-day lives. And it's that process of knowing, getting to know ourselves, that's so important that I think people don't always give themselves that time to do.
Last kind of question I had for you is, I know a lot of people want to get into therapy, and I think it's just, it can be a little daunting and overwhelming, like, where do I begin, where do I start, and how do I find the right fit? So how would you recommend finding the right therapist for an individual?
It's a tricky one. I would say the more, and I find myself saying this a lot to new clients and reminding clients along the way, is that I want to hear if we're on the right track or if we're not on the right track. So I think what can happen sometimes as people are exploring therapy is they might not like some of the conversations that come up, or it might not be targeted where they want it to be, and they get shy about saying, this isn't really what I was thinking, or I'm not interested in this question, I'm interested in this other question, or I'm feeling annoyed at you, like the client saying to the therapist, for saying what you said. Those conversations are really powerful and can help with growth, but that can be hard.
Yeah.
So I try and establish as best that I can sort of open space for those things to happen and people to understand, like, I'm with you, like, let's figure this out. Every client is different, and so to learn what's working, what isn't for each client is a real process of being honest with each other and connecting about things. So that's a little further down the road, but the earlier part of your question is, how does somebody even find a therapist? I mean, I definitely think asking around is a good place to start, and I think in this day and age there's less stigma, even though there still is some stigma, but there's less stigma. And I do think that once people know somebody else is open to therapy, there's almost like this connection that can happen from that space, where people can start to be even a little bit more honest if they feel like they've had some experiences that they feel a little bit freer to talk about. So certainly asking around. I know Psychology Today does they do a good job. It's a magazine, but they have an online place where you can search therapists, and they have nice descriptions of different therapists, and so that can be a really helpful resource to start finding therapists. If anybody's interested in working with me, I do a free discovery session to talk about groups. So that could be like looking, there are other people who do that kind of thing. So looking if there's anybody that you feel like you gravitate towards and they have something like a free initial session, that can be a really good way to start. Or even if you pay for a session, but let yourself do a little bit of searching too. I think sometimes people might want to pick one and get the right one. Find place to start if it feels okay, and you trust the person that recommended that person, but sometimes you might want to have a few people to see who resonates the most for you. So let yourself have that process if it feels like that's going to be the most helpful, and you don't have to. If you feel like, I'm just going to go with it, let me just see what happens. But as honest as you can be, the better. A good therapist is going to be able to work with any anger that comes up or anything that you're expressing that you're not thrilled about.
Yeah.
Or if you feel like you want to move towards something that the therapist isn't moving towards in terms of process, you can talk about it. Does the therapist have a reason for not going that way, and could you learn from that? Or as a team, as a collaborative team, that could be a great direction to explore together.
Yeah, I like that. And are you currently accepting new clients?
Yes.
So people could reach out? And where can people reach out at for that if they're interested? And then also on social media, where are you most active?
So if people want to find me on my website, it's my name actually, but my name can be hard to
links below.
remember. So it's Group with Tanya is a way to get there. So Group with Tanya, Tanya. You can get on my website there. I have a little documentary of my story of when I went to group, and so if they're interested in seeing that documentary, there's a way to watch it on my website. So that would be a way to connect to me. It would be amazing. I'd love to hear from people. And then social media, both TikTok and Instagram, but I do a little bit more on Instagram. But they both have the same handle, which is Tanya. Again, that's Tanya, Tanya the Therapist, all one word.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on my show. I'm so glad we got to hear your perspective, and I hope people learned something new, got, a different kind of perspective on things I like to discuss on here. So definitely go follow Tanya for that great content. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Same. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for listening. That was definitely nerve-wracking because it has been such a long time since I've had a guest on, especially a guest who wasn't an immediate friend. But I had such a great experience chatting with her. I hope you guys enjoyed our talk. Again, all of her links will be down below. And let me know who you want me to talk with next. Don't forget to share the podcast on your IG story, leave a review on Apple Music, and I will see you guys next week. Bye, everyone.